Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Mind of Marie. Today, we're exploring the architecture of human connection, family dynamics, and the powerful ways we learn to listen when words aren't the primary currency. My guest today has returned to the show to take us deeper into a world built on resilience, fierce love, and bridging deep cultural divides. Maria Gallucci is a multi award winning real estate leader, founder of Uptown Realty Group and ASL Realty, and a dedicated advocate for the deaf and LGBTQ plus communities. As the author of a deeply moving new book, Raised in Silence Lessons on Listening, Love, and Loud Family Dinners from a Child of Deaf Adults, Maria is obviously a source for those who need to learn more about what it is like to be a CODA. And I just want to say it is an absolute joy to have you back in the studio today.
Thank you so much for having me again. It was great.
So, Raised in Silence gives us such an intimate look at growing up as a CODA. We often talk about family structures in terms of roles, but in your household, those functional roles were quite unique. How did growing up as one of six hearing children raised by deaf parents shape your early understanding of family functionality and responsibility?
So I think for me, growing up, I didn't think our family was different, and obviously there were six hearing kids and two deaf parents, and ASL was my first language. So for me, it was just normal to us. But outside our home, I think I quickly realized that the world wasn't always accessible to my parents because they were deaf. So I interpreted, made phone calls, and helped bridge the communication gap. So I feel like for me, it taught me responsibility at a very young age, but it also taught me something I still believe today, which is that my parents weren't limited because they were deaf. And many times it was the world around them that created the limitation. And that's really how it shaped my thinking of inclusion today.
So, you describe the reality of having to interpret massive life altering situations at a very young age, helping your parents buy a house at just 12 years old, and later interpreting your mother's terminal cancer diagnosis. What did that level of emotional weight and early functional maturity teach you about the boundary between childhood and adult responsibility?
I definitely grew up faster than most kids, and I was also a teen mom. And so I think that responsibility was able to give me the guidance and the knowledge of being a teen mom with my child.
I can relate to that one myself. I had my first child when I was 17 and a half. So, in many bicultural or signing households, the child becomes the functional voice for the parents in the outside world. How did taking on that role shift the internal dynamics between you and your parents? And how did your family protect the sacred bond of love and respect through those moments?
I think that for me, I always say that there's a big difference between someone's voice and their bridge. And so my parents absolutely had their own voices, but my role was to help make communication happen. And so sometimes people would talk to me instead of looking at my parents. And even now, as an adult, especially in the closings that I do for the real estate, I always tell them, you need to talk to the interpreters. Like, you need to talk to them, not me. So for me, that's what I feel like people have to understand, that just because there's a different culture or a communication gap, you still have to talk to them directly.
So, a central theme in your book and life is the motto, just try. Stepping into rooms where you have to bridge two completely different worlds requires incredible courage. Where does that drive come from when the temptation might otherwise be to stay quiet or uncomfortable?
For me, it's just try really becomes from believing that we talk ourselves out of too many things because we're afraid we'll get it wrong. And you don't have to be perfect. And I feel like we're always afraid of doing something that's wrong. And that happens with inclusion as well, because if I people are sometimes so afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing than doing nothing. And so for me, if you don't know sign language or don't know their culture, that's okay. Just make eye contact, write, set something down, use your phone, ask somebody what their preferred communication is. And you don't have to know everything. You just have to be willing to make the effort. And that to me is what just try means.
So, you've translated those early life lessons into massive professional success, ranking in the top 1% of agents in Colorado and building national platforms like ASL Realty. How did growing up in a visual sign first environment hone your capacity for deep listening and building trust in business?
Growing up with ASL, and especially that being my first language, taught me that listening has very little to do with your eyes. So I learned to watch people's faces, their body language, eye contact, and expression. So sometimes what someone isn't saying tells you more what than what they're actually saying. And that became incredibly valuable, especially in real estate, because people want to know you're paying attention to them, especially when they're making one of the biggest financial decisions of their lives. And I feel like whether it's real estate, leadership, or relationships, trust begins when people feel like they're understood and that you're listening to them.
Raised in Silence doesn't just talk about being a CODA, it also speaks to intersectionality, representation, and advocacy within the LGBTQ plus community. How has living at the intersection of these rich, distinct identities expanded your vision of what true inclusion looks like?
For me, I've learned that exclusion can look very different to different people. And so you could be deaf, blind, hard of hearing, LGBTQ plus, or speak another language. They all looked different from everyone else in the room, or simply you may feel like nobody understands you. And I think that's why the Raise in Silence isn't about the deaf community. That's where the story obviously originated from, but it's about being inclusive and belonging, and not feeling like you're an outcast.
So, if Raised in Silence were a message in a bottle for future generations, specifically about love, communication, and human connection, what is the core truth that you hope stays with them from reading this book?
I think for me, it's don't try to become someone else just to fit in. The things that make you different often becomes the things that you're proud of later and your superpower. And so I always, because my son's gay, so I've always told him like your story has value and don't make anybody else feel like you're less than.
I absolutely agree with that. Thank you for sharing your story and your vision. Is there anything else you would like to add before we kind of sum this up today?
I think for me, sometimes a very small act of inclusion can make a big difference in their life, and just one small act of kindness. And I feel like people don't realize that you can change someone's life that day. You can change their path that day. And just one small act of kindness can do that.
That is true. To everyone listening, as always, I will have Maria's book linked in the show notes so that you can pick it up and learn more about what she does. Make sure that you go grab a copy of Raised in Silence. This is available in print, ebook, and audiobook formats, so there's really no excuse why you can't find some way to get it today. And remember that the mind is the most important story that we'll ever tell. Thank you, as always, for listening to The Mind of Cyber.